Alrighty, we're starting a new section here, which is Chapter 3, the cells, the living units. And as you can see, we're on page 61. And I'm beginning with the opening paragraph from Dr. Merib. And I'm annotating the words here a little bit because I think it's important to emphasize things in a certain way. She is talking about 50 to 100 trillion. I usually say 40 to 50 trillion, but she wants to say here 50 to 100 trillion cells in the human body that belongs to us, not to our flora, but to us particularly. And we've created a high-rise condominium, part of which, of course, has a large intestine, and we have flora in there. But at any rate, we have 40 to 50 trillion cells, modestly speaking, and each with their own balanced homeostasis, so that's an important point. Okay, and the thing that I want you to consider in all of this, with those, well, let's just say 50 trillion cells, that there is a coherent internal dialogue going on between them in such a way that they create tissues, and those tissues then form organs, and that there has to be how shall I say, clear, coherent dialogues. And that is the basis of homeostatic health. Okay? So with that in mind, I would also like to note that every night during sleep, we issue forth growth hormone. The growth hormone works specifically on glucose. It works on amino acid uptake, protein synthesis to some degree. Actually, the lean body mass mostly is over here with the liver. So the actually skeletal tissues are the province of the liver. And so when we have to do protein synthesis, collagen, bone tissue, so on down here, this is all the province of the livers. Historically, back in my early training, we called them somatomedins, and then in the 1990s, things got more discussed as insulin-like growth factors. So to say growth factors, there's hundreds of growth factors from the liver. There's only growth hormone, the single pituitary growth hormone from the brain, and it's the liver during sleep at night. That is, we shut everything down, and we repair the body, as it were, and even grow the body. If you're especially a young person, someone under the age of 5 is going through an enormous amount of growth. And so this bone tissue, skeletal tissues, and other biosynthetic pathways are going to be involved with the liver's output. Obviously, if someone has injury to the liver, or an adult, for instance, I'm assuming children don't drink alcohol, but an adult who's just had a six-pack and the whole pizza is probably not going to have a very good and clear sleep. Right, so to get actually 8 hours of really good sleep, restorative sleep, that means that you're going to get all of these benefits here involved in the cytology production. So that's what I wanted to emphasize in all of that. Here we have a typical cell, and we have a number of characteristics here that are similar to what we've spoken of before. So in cell theory, the cell is the basis for all structure. Most of life actually is unicellular. So to have bacteria, fungi, and so on, protistas are the most common species of life form. And we, as a high-rise condominium, a multicellular organism, we're literally a continent of various tissues that could be described, as mountain ranges and deserts and valleys and plains and so on. So quite the landscape that we are. The activity, it says, of the organism depends on both the individual as well as the collective activities of the cell. So cells are moving through the bloodstream as individuals, white blood cells, red blood cells, and we're growing cells. And individually they have roles to play. Collectively they have roles to play. And that's where the internal dialogue aspect of all of this comes in. Okay, so maintaining a coherent internal dialogue is part of the homeostatic functioning of things. Okay, so there are types of cells that are unique to the tissues. Some cells are unique in the sense that they can create little thin boundaries across which nutrients can travel. Other cells can create EMF signals, so we have nerves, muscles are included therein. Some part of the muscle can move, and therefore we have contraction, and so on. So there's a lot of differentiation that has a lot to do with function. Okay, and from one generation to the next, we're not going to be, how shall I say, creating different types of beings based on behavior. That's very Lamarckian. We're actually going to be similar from one generation to the next, assuming that we have normal, how shall I say, environmental conditions, normal nutrition, and so on. And the stresses of life are not that different from generation to generation. Okay, so with that in mind, that the daughter might look somewhat like the mother and the son might look something like the father. Okay, and particularly as one goes through the aging process, you can look at family histories and sort of determine what's going on with an individual when you're doing your clinical work. Okay, here we have every cell has a complete, how shall I say, manual. So right here in the nucleus, we have sort of the reserve book room where we have the reference journal, so to speak. We have the 46 chromosomes. We have all of the instructions. The instructions do not leave the reserve book room. That's the rule, right? You can take copies and take that out and do things with the copies, but you cannot leave the reserve book room with the DNA itself, right? And so over here we have some copies of parts of the DNA. These are this is ribosomal RNA, which is a copy, a transcript, as it were. Okay, and there's other transcripts that are out. If you look very, very closely, you'll notice that there are these little ribosomes present. And so the ribosomes will be also part of the RNA. And then there's going to be little, how shall I say, stretches of RNA that are the size of one gene. And they will be read by the ribosome, and they'll be producing proteins as a result of that. And we'll take a look at how that works. Some of these proteins are for export. Some of these proteins are for use within the system. Okay, so we'll take a look at that individually as time goes by. So the next thing that we should probably take a look at is the boundary itself, the plasma membrane. Membranes are made out of phospholipids. Remember, we were talking about triglycerides before. But what if you were to take one of the three tails and switch it around, spin that carbon, and put a phosphate head on it? So that's what this is. We leave two of the fatty acid tails in place. We spin the third fatty acid outward and replace it with a phosphate group, which is a polar group, and it dissolves in water very well. This interior region here is without polarity, and it has no admission of water. So there's water on the outside, there's water on the inside, but over here we have a lipid bilayer that prevents any sort of interference. What's going on here is going to stay there. Sort of what stays in Vegas, and what's outside is the outside. right? And we have transmembrane proteins to also provide communication as well as channels of movement from the outside in, inside out, and so on. These are little laminar proteins that are holding the interior of the cell up against the membrane. Okay, let's take it from there in the next one.